Hi, E104, day and night. Welcome to our first online mini lecture from OTI, well, court reporting at OTI. Let me scroll up a little bit here. I like to jump right into this handout because we don't have too much time. Can only upload 10 or 15 minutes right now. We might be able to lengthen that in the future, but 10 minutes is good for today. We're just going to try to distinguish between regular verbs and irregular verbs. That's our job for today. And then this will develop as we go through the term, and we'll add information onto this. These particular examples come from a writer, Steven Pinker, and this is one of his books here. It's called Words and Rules. And it's not his most popular one, but it's the one I think he's most proud of, because that's where his seminal work is. And on the verb phrase, what comes after the subject, that's where the action is, and that's where the ideas in the sentence really develop, and a really good explanation of how that works, particularly in the first chapter, and meant for the general reading public. Well, this information comes from this book, and let's distinguish between regular and irregular verbs. He says that English verbs come in two flavors, like chocolate and vanilla: regular verbs and irregular verbs. Now, we know there are action verbs and verbs to be, and transitive and intransitive, but this is another important distinction for us. Regular verbs are the ones that we can just throw the inflected ending ed on the end to make them past tense. Okay, so if you look down at the red lettering, jog is one. I jogged today. Yesterday I jogged. I walked today. Yesterday I walked. I played today. Yesterday I played, and so on and so on. The list is open-ended, which means that as new words come into the language and we change them into verbs, we can usually make them past tense by simply putting an ed on the end of them. For example, email came into the language. It became a verb. It became something that we do, so we can say something like, he emailed the letter to her. Just throw the ed on the end of email to make that a past tense verb. Google is obviously another one. I Googled today, or we Googled it yesterday to find out the answer. All right, look down a little bit. And then there's a sentence that says, have you ever heard a child say anything like the following? We're all around children, and one of the best parts of their development is when they're getting language, and we might hear something like, I buyed some of that candy for you, or my teacher holded the baby rabbits and we petted them. I stealed some of that water from that glass and put it in this glass. Well, what's happening there? Well, we know that the past tense of buy is bought and not buyed. We can't just throw an ed on the end of that one, but the child doesn't know that because he hasn't heard the exceptions yet. And those are the exceptions, the verbs that you need to change the form in order to get the past tense. Those are the irregular verbs. They're also called the strong verbs. That's because they come from an older form of the language. They come from Old English, and they're coming from a different place than most of the verbs that we can just put an ed on the end to make past tense. So we have those irregular verbs that are from an older form of English, and in order to get into the past tense they have to change their form. And then we have the regular verbs, a huge amount, the vast majority, that we just put an ed on the end to and to make them past tense. Okay, that's the story, and here are a couple of other irregular verbs. Look at the red again. At this moment, the bell will ring, present tense. Yesterday the bell rang, past tense, but a change in the form of the verb. It's also inflecting, but it's inflecting in a different way. It's inflecting by a spelling change. At this moment, comma, the child will cling, period. Yesterday the child clung. Not clang, not ring. You had ring rang, why not cling clang? Well, it just doesn't work that way. You can't depend on the rhyme. Well, that fact gives me an opportunity to introduce Dr. Richard Lederer, who, like Steven Pinker, is a very, very popular and interesting linguist. And even more important to us, he's a friend of the NCRA and a friend to court reporters. He writes a weekly column in the JCR, and wonderful books on the idiosyncrasies and things that people say that are humorous because of the structure of the language and the way the language has come down to us. So this little poem here, I won't read that, but it might be something that you want to read sometime. It'll be in our doc section, in our handout section, if you want to look at it. And the point he's making here is that you can't depend on spelling when it comes to figuring out the past tense of these regular verbs. All right, so we have Steven Pinker, we have Richard Lederer, we have regular verbs, we have irregular verbs, we have present tense and have past tense, but we also have some other tenses that we have to think about, or kinds of tenses. Look at this chart here. Pinker says that there are 180 irregular verbs. Not many, not a lot. That's why it won't be long before that child has heard all of them, has mastered all of them, and won't make those mistakes anymore. There's so few. And then the rest, he's just going to put an ED on the end of it to get the past tense. Look at this first irregular here. Shake. I'm going to skip the red and go right over to the next black. Shake is present tense. Shook is past tense. Okay. Changed its spelling, changed its form, and became past tense. Take becomes took, drink becomes drank, shrink becomes shrank. What's happening with the red ones? Well, if we take shake and put ing on the end of it, we get what we're calling the present participle. Present participle. If you look at the last column of red verbs, if we take shake and change it to shaken, put en on the end of it, then we have the past participle. So we have present participle ing, past participle often ed, sometimes en, sometimes a total change in the spelling or the form. All right, here's the thing about those red columns there. They can make very subtle tenses and very subtle distinctions in meaning. You can say, I am shaking, or she might shake, or she must be shaking. We could say, I have shaken, or I will have shaken for years, something like that. Notice what I'm doing there. I'm just picking out some of those helping verbs that are right up above the verb chart in those boxes at the top and plugging them into the slot before the verb to change the meaning, to make it more subtle. If we just take shall and throw it before drink, we can say, before drunk, we can say, I shall have drunk 20 beers by the end of the evening, something like that. So there are spaces before those participles, and we can use those helping verbs to get subtle meanings. Let's look at those helping verbs real quick. Up at the top of the list is do. That's a sort of a support verb. Do, does, did. Have and has had. Those are really important ones, as we see in that last column there. And then we have the modals after that. They're modal helpers, and we talked about those in class last week. And I also have on this same handout a pretty good explanation and a lot of good examples of how those modals work. So we're not going to look at it here, but we might look at it in class, or you might want to read it on your own. Look down at the bottom row and you'll see the verbs to be. They can be helping verbs also. She is shaking. It was taken. Something like that. So they can also be put in that position right before the participle to get a more subtle tense. So we have simple present, shake, Simple past, shook, I shook. I am shaking, shake with ing on the end of it, using that present participle. I have shaken the martini. That would be the past participle with the en on it for the more subtle tenses. Or okay, let's come down a little bit more. Here's that information about the modals that I was mentioning to you. Let's skip that for now. We'll get to that, or maybe you can get to it. I want to give you one more example before we wrap it up. Present, Doug writes. I was thinking of Doug that we know, the court reporter. Doug writes, simple present. Past, Doug wrote. All right, come down to the next set of sentences there. This would be an example of present plus a modal. Look at the modal right up in the center there. Doug can, I'm thinking of can, write. Can is the modal. That shows ability, something that he can do. Doug can write. We could say Doug might write. We could say Doug shall write, something like that. But those are all modals that slightly change the meaning of the sentence. So that's what's happening there. Let's come down to the next sentence. Doug has written. That's sort of present tense. He has written. Maybe he'll do it again, but it's done. He has written. He's completed it. Next one down, Doug had written. I'm going sort of right down the column there. That's past, and that seems more done. There's less of a chance that this is ongoing and that he will do it again. So the verbs, the helping verbs with the past participles there do a lot of work. And then the last one, we have a present participle in that. Doug is writing. It's in the present tense. He's still doing it, probably. He is writing as we speak. And there's the verb to be, is. That's acting as a helping verb. All right, we'll come up a little bit. We'll just look at these last two sentences and wrap it up. Look at the one that starts with the word written, or I should say the past participle, written. Written years before she was born, comma, the document was awesome as well as interesting, period. Written years before she was born, comma, the document was awesome as well as interesting, period. I was thinking of awesome in the sense of something huge and maybe a little scary. It's so big or good, something like that. But starts out with a past participle. We're going to need a comma at the end of that. The RPR will demand it. The real world will demand it. But clarity demands it. Written years before she was born, the document was awesome as well as interesting. You know, clarity of expression and thought. Next one, writing at only 160 words per minute, comma, Doug began to wish that they would speak faster, period. This actually happened when Doug was writing and Barb and I were dictating. If you remember, he said, go faster, go faster. Writing, present participle. Writing at only 160 words per minute, comma, Doug began to wish they would speak faster, period. So there's an example of an introductory present participial phrase. All right. This is my Florence hat, but I decided to take it off. I bought this in Florence, and I wanted to mention that if you like Dan Brown, he has a new book out called Inferno, and it's set in Florence, in Dante's Florence. And the main point is we all want to read over the summer because, as I mentioned many times, and I know this from hanging around reporters, top reporters in the country, that after a while, when you're in the business for a while, it becomes less about writing and more about words. It becomes more about the business of words, the meaning of words. Because the writing, you would hope that that's going to become as automatic as speaking is for you. You don't have to think about what you're going to say before. You have to think about what you're going to say, but it just sort of flows out. And that's the way you want it to flow out of your hands also. But eventually it becomes about words more than anything. So we want to start reading now. Read as much as you can over the summer. Summer is a good time for reading. We sit outside sometimes or at the beach or in the park. You might think about Steven Pinker's books. You might think about David Crystal's books. You might think about Richard Lederer's books, anything about language, but that doesn't matter so much. Read anything that you like, and you're going to get something from it. And you can even read Dan Brown's book that's set in Florence. I bought this hat in Florence. Okay, talk to you soon. We'll see if this works out.